You can start, Dion. You're muted. You're muted, Dion.
All right, good morning, all. Uh, Welcome to the press, to this press conference of the Working People's Alliance. I'm Dion Abrams, and I will be sharing today's press conference. At the head table today, we have Brother Takuma Ogunse, Brother David Hines, Dr. Hines, David Hines, one of the co-leaders of the party. We have Brother Rohit Kanai, who is also a co-leader. We have Professor Clive Thomas, and there are several issues that will be discussed at this morning's press conference. These issues will be highlighted in the release of the WPA, the press release, which will be read by Dr. David Hines. And so I want to have us rolling right away and have Dr. Hines read the press conference before we move into other matters. Dr. Hines.
Thank you very much, Brother Dion. Good morning to members of the media.
Dr. Hines, go ahead and read it.
Sorry. Sorry, are you hearing me?
Yes,
Am I being? Yes. Yes. Good morning again to the media.
Yeah, we are.
Good morning again. In April 2024,
How much you check the morning? Not 5,000 things. How much are you
based infrastructure company to meet the urgent energy demand in Guyana. The project involves two separate contracts under which UCC Holding leases a power ship from Car Power Ship to provide energy to Guyana Power and Light Incorporated, supplying 27% of Guyana's total electricity demand. Car Power Ship provides UCC Holding with leasing, operation, and maintenance with an initial capacity of 36 megawatts for 2 years. Given what we in the WP have unearthed worldwide, we have unearthed worldwide about the announced Car Power Ship electricity deal, WPA presumes the government would have prudently done a due diligence on Car Power Ship to safeguard the public interest. The contrast between the firm's website view of itself and the torrent of corrupt practices leveled against it is stupendous. Against this backdrop, WPA demands the public release of the government's due diligence report and the terms designed to protect taxpayers' funds. WPA reiterates its call on GCOM to do everything within its power to ensure that the upcoming electoral exercise meets the required standards of a free, fair, and credible election. Despite pushbacks from the PPP, WPA continues to believe more, not less, should be done to ensure this outcome. We repeat, WPA continues to believe that more, not less, should be done to ensure this outcome. In this regard, we believe that a clean voters list and the use of biometrics would decrease, not increase, opportunities for electoral fraud. We are therefore dismayed at the PPP's insistence on retaining the status quo which that party itself, along with foreign observers, have deemed to be below the required standards. WPA notes Vice President Jack Deo's dismissal of our proposal to extend the election deadline if necessary to accommodate the required changes as an attempt to trap the PPP. It is apt to note that the PPP supported a similar proposal in 1990 that delayed the election of that year by almost 2 years. WPA says that the only trap it is interested in is a free and fair election, whereby the rules and the machinery are accepted by all participants and stakeholders. We too are not interested in keeping the PPP in office one day beyond its term. We are interested in ensuring that the PPP and other parties do not use the current flawed system and the machinery to steal the upcoming elections. In that regard, WPA prefers to have the government remain in place for a few months to ensure that it does not steal 5 years. WPA therefore asks, why is the PPP afraid of more electoral safeguards? Why is that party fighting so hard to minimize those safeguards? We are forced to conclude that there must be some sinister motive. WPA hereby declares that electoral fraud, whether before election day, on election day, after election day, or through the manipulation of the current porous and fragile system, is unacceptable. We intend to use every avenue available to us to fight for a free and fair election. The PPP must not be allowed to carry out its obvious intention to win by foul means. That 5:30 a.m. meeting. WPA believes that the recent spectacle of the president presiding over an early morning meeting in which he publicly shamed ministers, permanent secretaries, contractors, and engineers, ostensibly for tardiness in meeting deadlines for contract, is a clear sign that things have fallen apart. The meeting, which was akin to a public trial of enemies of the state, was not an exercise of good governance, as the PPP would have us believe. Rather, it exposes a government caught in the logic of its own corrupt and sinister procurement practices. WPA said that this was an obviously staged and orchestrated spectacle to make the president appear as a hands-on manager. Nothing could be further from the truth. WPA warns Guyanese not to be fooled by the president's antics or to view the meeting as the proverbial reading of the Riot Act. The only Riot Act read by the president was on his own government's inability to effectively govern a modern state. That a head of state has to resort to a comical spectacle to address government shortcomings suggests a serious rot in the PPP and the government that is beyond repair. Corrupt and underhand procurement practices can only lead to corrupt outcomes. The president's attempt to separate himself and his government from the rot in and of the system misses the mark by a long way. The attempt to make contractors the scapegoats for government's corruption must not be allowed to fly. If indeed the contractors are guilty of tardiness and shoddy work, they are merely a reflection of a shoddy, tardy, and unfit government and governance culture. cash grant handouts, and teenage parents. WPA again raises the scandalous decision to exclude teenage parents below the age of 18 from the current cash handout proposed by the government. Only an unfeeling government and country can endorse such outright callousness. The government should hang its head in shame for visiting such economic violence against the poor, the youth, and the most vulnerable in our country. How can you claim to love all the people when you willfully exclude some of them from the country's patrimony? The government's deafening silence on this issue is startling, to say the least. The usually vocal vice president and attorney general have avoided it like the proverbial plague. WPA takes the opportunity to reiterate its commitment to ensure that all segments of the society benefits equitably and directly from our oil windfall. We are guided by the all-inclusive principle, whereby all are included so that none is excluded. In this regard, we feel the household or family remains the most democratic distributive vehicle. Random distribution to selected segments of the society is at best exclusionary and anti-democratic. WPA says, do not use our oil money to penalize teenage parents. Referendum on oil contract. WPA notes the confusion in the PPP's camp on the proposed referendum on the 2016 oil contract. The vice president's distancing of the government from the attorney general's stance on the subject, while repeating the latter's rhetoric, could not be more revealing of a government that speaks from both sides of its mouth. Both Jagdeo and Nandalal cast doubts on the proposed referendum on the grounds that a yes vote will not be binding on GCOM. While that contention is true, an affirmative referendum vote would be a potent bipartisan national tool in the hands of a government as it engages Exxon. To cite Exxon's potential inflexibility in the face of a formal national demand as the reason for rejecting the referendum is akin to throwing in the towel before the game starts. WPA therefore reiterates its support for the proposed referendum as part of a package of referenda, which must include the issues of legal, structured cash transfers and power sharing / shared governance. WPA has hitherto avoided the public debate on the oil contract, partly because we were not part of the decision making in 2016, and partly because we feel that the renegotiation of the contract should not be discussed in isolation from the distribution of the proceeds that come from it. However, we do not believe it hurts to have the country engage in a mass discussion of the subject via a form of direct democracy. WPA holds the view that substantive democracy should mean that all those who are affected by national decisions should participate in the decision making. Compensation for Quindon Bacchus's family. WPA welcomes the court's judgment of monetary compensation to Quindon Bacchus's family for his murder by an agent of the state. While no amount of money could compensate for the loss of life, we see this judgment as a symbolic victory for the rule of law and the right to life. We hope this ruling emboldens families who have lost members through unjust police action to similarly move to the courts to seek justice. We also hope that the government and the state view this ruling as a signal that extrajudicial killings should be addressed with an eye on its abolition. For too long, Guyana has had to carry this burden. It is a sore on our national psyche that must be eradicated. The PPP government, which have presided over the most extrajudicial killings, especially those of African Guyanese male, should view the ruling as a wake-up call to turn from its bloody ways. Discrimination in coverage of the WPA by segments of the media. WPA notes the repeated non-coverage of its positions on national issues by the state-owned and segments of the privately owned media. This has been particularly acute since 2020. While WPA respects the right of editors and owners to ultimately decide what should be published, we strongly object to discrimination in coverage. In a democratic environment whereby free speech is sacrosanct, all public voices which operate within the ambit of the law deserves media coverage if they so seek. State-owned media are subsidized by the people's taxes and patrimony, while the privately owned media benefit from advertisements from the government. While WPA does not expect positive coverage from the state media or from the PPP-aligned media, it feels that the state media, in particular, should give coverage to all parties. WPA notes that some privately owned media criticize the state media for such practice while engaging in the very behavior. WPA is aghast that one privately owned independent media house, the Stabric News, for example, repeatedly ignores our press statements, even as it gives extensive coverage to other parties on the same issues addressed in our releases. WPA views this as naked bias and discrimination. We do not ask the Stabric News and other media houses to like the WPA, but to deny one party or group a public good which others enjoy is a civil rights violation. WPA therefore calls on the state-owned media, the privately owned media, and the Guyana Press Association to treat this matter with some urgency. End of statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hines, for the WPA's statement, the release that you have read. Before we move to the press, I'm going to ask Professor Thomas to make a brief presentation so that then we'll have the press ask their questions. Over to you, Professor Clive Thomas. Professor Thomas?
Unmute, and your video is also off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My remarks are going to be centered and trying to elaborate on some aspects of what David said. First of all, I'd like to make it very clear that we are against a lot of these behaviors that he's talked about, largely because we are afraid that the government is trying to normalize anti-democratic behavior in the way in which it governs the country. There can be no binding forward contracts. The last attempts to do that historically has been through the indenture system, and more recently and for more prominence, the slavery system of bondage. You can't tie to a contract parties to be forever bound into the terms of the contract. So every contract is recognized in every country in the world as universally subject to the possibility of change. So the fact that the government would argue in defense of our claim that we should be looking at changing the contract through a referendum is in itself an insult to that tradition, because what we're trying to do is to exercise the democratic aspect of every single contract, that it cannot bind people forever into eternity. It has to be subject to change as long as the parties agree. To repeat it is only to try to make a defense for Exxon. And we would think that the government has other interests to protect other than to exercise and make claims about the primacy of Exxon's position. The second thing I want to draw some attention to is that the electricity contract that the government has signed with a company which, if you were to look at its website, is full of glowing remarks about how wonderful it is, how much it can do to supply the needy with the electricity. It boasts about its ability to carry electricity and energy to the whole world. It makes a lot of these boasts. But when you look at the actual record of that company, it is one of the most devastatingly negative portrayals of the behavior of a company that is involved in a public good, like supplying energy to poor states. It operates on every continent. I was about to say except Latin America, but it does operate in Guyana and Cuba. But it operates mainly in Europe, Middle East, Asia, and lots of countries in Africa, about 20 of them. Anybody get into a serious negotiation with that company, but through any sort of cursory research, discover that that company has one of the most distasteful reputations for an energy company in the world, not only by the type of fuel that it uses to cause environmental hazards, but by the behavior of the ownership, the management, and so forth. Every perceivable crime that a multinational can commit, they have been accused of committing. And we have a paper which we can make available to any of the people who might want to have it in the audience who are representing the media today, where some of these things are portrayed, a significant amount of it. But these are only the toppings of what is really the basis material that we have on a company. To find out more about it, you have to go to the daily papers of all the countries where they operate, to the court proceedings of the many court trials that they've had, both nationally and internationally. And that is going to take some effort. But every country knows that is the case. And what people normally do is to get a due diligence done in the operations of the companies that you are going to deal with, pay for it. And there are many consultants around the world who prepare these and sell the data to the government. And on that basis, the government can make a decision. So the government can't come and tell us now that they didn't know all about this, about the company, because we negotiated with them for years. So we are asking, therefore, that the due diligence studies that they have done be made public, because we can't believe that they haven't done any. And based on the principle and the normal expectation of what a prudent government should do or would be doing, we are asking that they make that available to the public as a whole and to WPA, where we can develop our thesis about how we should deal with the electricity problem more in a more systematic way. We are, of course, concerned And we have mentioned that at the last press conference, that the electricity, like some other problems that we have in Guyana, including oil and gas, the election reform, GCOM, that there's some problems of governance which cannot be solved in one generation of a particular government. It has to be multi-government and operate through time. And we will make a proposal sometime next year to the other political parties in the process, engage in the process of the elections, about how we might be able to tackle these issues so that we have a foundation both for multi-party commitment to the process and also for the execution and responsibility of each generation of government to uphold the principles of that agreement. So those are the general remarks I'd like to make.
Thank you, Professor Thomas, for your remarks. We're now going to open the floor to questioning from the members of the media. Just indicate your desire to ask a question, and then we'll have one of the members of the head table respond to you based upon the question you've asked. Any questions?
Yes, Mr. Abrams, Dennis Shabral, Jamgar.
Okay, then let's go right ahead.
On the point of governance to which Professor Thomas referred a few seconds ago, as a member of the joint opposition parties, what's the mood now? Would the opposition contest the elections if it does not get electoral reform, specifically as it relates to the voters list, or will it contest the elections?
No, I haven't been involved in those discussions, and I wouldn't make a far-reaching claim like that. But what I'm saying is that we have, through practice, been able to discover that there's several weaknesses in our governance system. I think most persons would agree with that. And perhaps the most persistent is due to the fact that we're a small country, we have limited human resources, we have limited financial resources. But now we're in the era of oil, so the possibilities of doing better than what we did before now exist. And we think that some forward planning and getting all the political parties engaged in the process of planning our collective future is a foundation on which we can build. And we are hoping that that is the advisory committee to the party in the area of governance and politics and economics is hoping to persuade the party to go forward with a program to try to mobilize the participation of all other political parties, including the government itself, if it is interested, and we hope it is, in having a multi-party agreement on the way forward on certain basic economic decisions, which involves humongous scale and pressure of time and resources to have amended, and it cannot be done by one generation of any government, even if it's a multi-party government.
Any other
Can I then
member of the head table?
can I ask Professor Hines to respond to my question?
Please
Yeah,
repeat the
okay,
question.
David.
My question is a member of the joint opposition or group of joint opposition parties. What is the mood now in that grouping? Are you going to contest the elections or not if you don't get electoral reform, specifically as it relates to some of the demands you're making about biometrics and so on?
At this point in time, we are planning to participate in the elections, as far as I know. That is why we have stepped up our media coverage, and we are engaged in trying to prepare a manifesto for the elections.
Yeah.
Right, but I'm asking if you don't get those reforms. I was hoping Professor Hines.
No, we're not setting up any deadlines. We're not saying that if we don't get what we want, we will do so X, Y, Z. We have not reached that stage yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
I want to echo Professor Thomas's view. We have not gotten to that point yet. We feel that that we are making some headway in terms of upping the ante on the government. We feel that the media are becoming much more open to our arguments on the opposition side, and this is putting some pressure on the government and other stakeholders. So we are going to continue to press for those reforms to be initiated, even as we continue to prepare for elections. But we are not in the point of laying down lines in the sand at this time. But the mood among the joint opposition parties is one of commitment to ensure that we get those reforms, we get the biometrics, we get the voters list, we get an impartial GCOM machinery.
But you've been making these demands as the opposition combined, Professor Hines,
They're not
since the
demands.
last elections. Why do you think you'll get to the nth hour?
Well, in politics, things usually heat up as the moment of elections come around. But it is also important to note that the public is now becoming much more involved in this issue. The government has been responding to the issues, although negatively, they have been responding. GCOM has been responding to some of these issues. They have prepared a feasibility study. They have not done so, although we've been calling for 4 years. So as we get closer to elections, we feel that the issue is becoming much more in the minds of people, and people are now beginning to pay more attention to the issue. So it is not a timetable that we can control. It is one that is being controlled by people's curiosity about the issue, media coverage, for example, and the fact that the joint opposition, because we have not been speaking as a joint opposition consistently for the last 4 years. The old issue of the joint opposition coming together on this issue is a recent phenomenon. So that in itself is a very important development.
You're true,
I
Dennis?
would also stress, Mr. Chairman, for the benefit of the press, the importance of shared governance in the history of the WPA. It's not a new belief or a new standard we're taking. We've always felt that the long-run solution to Guyana lies in the direction of some sort of shared governance. Shared and how we share what are the parties involved and so on. That will be left to time. We can't predict that as a necessary outcome at this point in time. But I'm convinced, at least personally, that at some point in time, shared governance has to be the direction in which we go.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Dennis, you're through with your questions?
For the time.
Okay. Svetlana, you have a question?
Yes. Svetlana Marshall from News. Dr. Hines, the Vice President would have repeatedly said that the 2020 elections, on the day of elections, voting went well up until there was the tallying of the tabulation for Region 4. So he's saying, although the lists may appear bloated, only about 460,000 persons voted. And that is an indication that people who weren't supposed to, they were like voter impersonation, at least to a large extent. That's his reasoning. What's your thought on that? Because he's saying that the systems worked in 2020 up to a point.
And we are saying that yes, on election day, there were not many reports of overt manipulation. But when matters got to the recount, which was not expected to happen, really brought to the fore a lot of manipulation before election day. And this is where the list comes in. What the 2020 election taught us, and the vice president does not want to admit, is that manipulation of election does not occur only on election day or in the tallying after the voting. It occurs long before election day. And that a bloated voters list is an invitation to manipulation. We have documented instances of voter impersonation, and this was confirmed by the immigration authorities, by the police commissioner, who was sent samples of people who were considered not to have been in the country when they voted. And based on the samples, when the commissioner sent his reply, it found that over 70% of the sample of people who were not in the country at the time of voting. We also had instances where statutory documents in over 45 boxes, I think 47, 48 boxes on the East Coast were missing. People who were dead were voting. And so we are saying that it is better to decrease the possibility for voter impersonation, for manipulation, than to leave the possibility open for more of that. We also want to draw attention to the human factor that, as the PPP argued a few years ago, that in places where political parties, find hostile territory and thus would not have polling agents and so on, that is open season for the human element to kick in. So what the WPA is saying, look, the PPP has said that the system is shaky. The foreign observers have said that. CARICOM in its report stressed that. CARICOM said that GCOM in its present state is in no position to conduct a free and fair election. They said that. And we are saying, given all these charges, given the charges by the PPP, given the charges by the opposition, it is important that GCOM address the concerns of all parties, the concerns of the PPP, the concerns of the APNU, AFC, the concerns of the observers. GCOM has a responsibility to address all of those concerns. And we are saying it is better to have more safeguards than less safeguards. The PPP seem to be interested in the minimum safeguards. We are interested in maximum safeguards.
But Dr. Hines, we have had examples of leaders of the PPP, very ones who are touting that everything is all right and so on, who are involved in voter impersonation in Luziknan, in Straths Bay and so on, people going into one house, changing clothes, coming out back to go and vote and all of these things. And the PPP are aware of that because they were the agents of it. So how is it that they're saying that everything is okay? Are we to accept that?
But Mr. Abrams and members of the panel, where were the opposition polling agents to see these things on the day of the poll itself? And secondly, there were, how do you respond to the fact that at the time of the submission of the names by the Commissioner of Police then, um, and Immigration and so on, that a number of persons did come out publicly, including one election observer, and said that he was in the country at the time?
Dennis, you're asking where the polling agents were. The polling agents were there, and that is why we are saying the human factor. Polling agents may feel intimidated. Polling agents may not be paying attention. There is the human factor. So we don't think that that is something that we need to delve in. And you are repeating what the PPP said, which is that they sent a bunch of names, one batch of 205 names, and it came back that 173 of the people were not in the country. 32 people said it was proven that were in the country, but the vast majority of people were not in the country. In any case, if one person voted who was not in the country at the time, that is enough to cast doubts and to push GCOM to act.
My
No,
other
Professor,
question would be,
I'm not repeating what the PP is saying. I'm going by what are authentic press reports when the names were submitted from the Immigration Department.
Yes, but I'm telling you, one batch of 205 names was presented, and 173 of those persons were deemed to be out of the country. 32 of them were deemed to be in the country. So we are accepting that not every person on the list that was sent to the commissioner was out of the country. But the vast majority, 173 out of 2005. And I'm saying that even if it was one out of 205, that was enough for concern. So I'm not accusing you of saying peddling the PPP line, but you're giving the PPP side and not the other side.
Dr.
Yes,
Hines,
yes.
in the absence of what you've been calling for, like my colleague mentioned, these are not new calls, enhanced biometrics, a clean voters list. And you spoke to the issue of human error. What is going to be done differently this time around to ensure that for example, the agents of the political parties, WPA agent or the opposition agent, do what they're supposed to do and are able or confident enough to speak up if there's a case of vote impersonation, for example? What are the plans in place to address this problem, just in case there's no enhanced biometrics or there's not, in your view, a clean list?
Well, we're hoping that there'll be enhanced biometrics and a clean list. The parties obviously will engage in more training of its agents, and that's the most they can do. And it is not true. It is not true that that all of the agents in 2020 were not alert. I, as an accredited representative of opposition on election day, went in to Monrepo, and where a young man was caught by one of our agents attempting to vote the second time. And it caused quite an uproar. Minister Nandalal was there. Minister Basil Williams and Amna Ali were there for the opposition. And I was passing, and Mr. Nandalal stopped me and said, look, this boy made a mistake. And he was pleading with Amna Ali and Basil Williams to settle it at the party level. And they were unwilling to do so. And he was requesting of me to make recommendations, make representation to them to have the matter settled between the parties. He was admitting, and I'm prepared to go to court and to give testimony on that matter. I saw voter impersonation with my own eyes in Strathspey as I approached where they were distributing ID cards to people the van in which they were located sped away. And neighbors around there pointed me to the polling booth where the vote impersonation was taking place. One person said to me that he was offered another ID card to vote a second time, and he said no. So yes, there were lapses on the part of some of our polling agents, but there were also instances where they actually caught people impersonating the vote.
Another question on the power shift. You spoke about the contract. If there was a feasibility done, the need for that study to be made public and the contract to be made public. The government has said in defending its move to have another power ship in the country that it is intended to meet the growing demands. Do you see the growing demands that the government is referencing to with regards to power?
Yes, clearly we have a deficit in power supply. I'm not doubting that. And that is why I'm saying that there's a structural deficit in that we're not going to solve that problem in one generation of government. So what we need to have is a multi-party or multi-generational agreement where the parties commit to giving some contribution at every stage of the government's life, whatever government they're participating in, to meet certain standards, certain agreed goals or measures of the energy generation the country should have. And it is not a feasibility study I'm talking about. I'm talking about a due diligence study where we set about to establish whether the company has the credibility to meet all the standards and prerequisites of their contract. And therefore, we have to build in the terms, the penalties, all of these other guideposts to make sure the contract does not operate where they throw their hands up in the air and they view the government to suffer. Because if you become dependent on a ship to supply you with power, who is in more need of the ship than you? What happens if the ship goes away? It's like saying if a man owes me $10, I'm in trouble. But if he owes me about $1 million, he's in trouble. The ship can just go away, sail away, claim that it has the owners of the ship in some other land, and they seize the ship because it hasn't paid its dues. What can you do when you're depending on the whole nation and the power that is supplying? That's the type of thing that you have to work out when we deal with companies at the international level. We brought in barges from I think it was Honduras. I don't know how many score of them we brought in. Not one is generating power. And that was a wasted effort on the part of the government when I was in the government. And that will continue. The solution will arrive when you already finished the government. So we have to be sure that when we sign a contract, we can meet the contract, and they will have no incentive to use illegal measures to obtain your money and get away with it.
Is your question answered?
Yes,
Marshall?
thank you. My final questions to Dr. Hines. Should the WPA form part of the next government, what plans does the party has for the Ghana police force, given what is currently being plagued with allegations of corruption and other serious allegations? What are the plans for the force?
Well, look, we feel the Guiding Police Force needs, like a lot of the institutions in our country, which has been corrupted by the PPP, needs a complete overhaul. As a party that believes that we must not act just off the top of our heads, we would support and a clear commission of inquiry into the operation of the police force. And we would recommend that such an inquiry be conducted by a combination of Guyanese and regional experts to come in and to carry out a commission of inquiry. And we would be guided by the findings of such an inquiry. We feel that the police force is too important an institution to be left to drift in the way that it's been left to drift. We also believe that we should not take a knee-jerk approach to remedying the problems of the police force. And that is why we would support a commission of inquiry, a serious commission of inquiry. I don't know if any one of my colleagues want to speak to that matter. Oji, you're muted. You're muted.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, yes.
I will want to add that immediately the WPA will insist that the current rules that we have on the books, laws and bylaws be implemented without delay. Part of the problem you have with the police force is that they don't implement the laws that govern them, and the government doesn't do that too, because the government policy, in order to have the police force be loyal to the government, they encourage the top of the police force and the police force in general to engage in corruption. And when these officers become corrupt, they recruit the corrupt officers, and the corrupt officers become the basis of their political control in the institution. So while we wait for the commission, we will quickly move to tighten the system using all the laws and regulations that we have on the book, and to create a new atmosphere where those who are accountable in the senior ranks and they violate their responsibility, they will be punished.
The depoliticization of the police force is a priority, we feel, because we think that a lot of the problems in the police force begins there, with the politicization of the police force. And so a top priority would be the depoliticization of the police force. Another priority would be the wages for policemen and women. Like all public servants, we feel that they're not paid adequate wages. And so that in itself helps the corruption syndrome in the force. So one of the things that we would make a priority is to improve the wages and salaries of the police force, members of the police force, especially at the lower ranks. We feel that training of our policemen and women, not only in policing, but also an understanding of the society in which they are functioning. Because these policemen and women are not just there to carry a gun and shoot people. They're there to serve and protect. And if you're serving and protecting a society, you have to understand the society. You have to understand the dynamics of the society, the class dynamics of the society, the ethnic dynamics of the society. You have to understand how is it you protect women and children. These are priorities we think that are important if we are going to begin to turn around the police force. But we will be guided by a commission of inquiry. Even as we think that wages and salaries, the depoliticization of the police force, and a training of members of the police force that include an understanding of the social dynamics, social and cultural dynamics of the society.
Professor Hines, how do you envisage dealing with the politicization of the police force when it is actually the parties in government, more often than not, as soon as they assume office after an election, appoint police service commissions of their own that they see fit? How do you guard against the politicization of the police force in that context, when indeed the commission is responsible in large measure for the appointment and disciplinary action of police officers?
Well, look, that is why the WPA stresses a national government. We feel that these one-party governments are susceptible to the very problems that you mentioned there, because they become a law to themselves. So if you have a national government that includes more than one party, the party serves as checks and balances on each other. And the objective of a national outcome and the national good, we feel, is better protected by a multi-party national government than a one-party government. For example, we in the WPA have always felt that in any government that we are part of, that we are not just there to make the government look good, but we are there to make government work in the interest of the nation. And we see ourselves as part of any government as also being a check on bad governance. And we make no apologies for that, because ultimately for us, it is not about how successful a party is in government, but how successful that government is in reforming the society and transforming the society for the better.
But in the absence of a multi-party government, how do you see the conundrum to which I've referred being addressed?
Well, we work with what we have at the moment until we get the outcome of multi-party government. We feel that these matters have to be discussed in public. We do not believe in secrecy in government. It is something that we in the WPA turn our face sternly against. And we feel that these matters have to be discussed publicly. They have to be put in the public sphere, and that publicity itself will, we hope, serve as a deterrence, as a check on bad governance.
But Dennis, one of the things that we need to consider also is the fact that these commissions that you were saying are biased. The problem is that the police force, all of the government agencies were subjected to promotion based upon seniority, and there was a particular system in place for people to be promoted to the positions that they were supposed to have. But all that have become so corrupted now because we see what is playing out with the Brutus thing, because the PPP is so entrenched and engaged in trying to force upon the nation people whom they feel are committed to them and aligned to them, that they have thrown all of these systems out of place. The Teaching Service Commission has worked out with the Guyana Teachers Union systems that were supposed to be used for promotion of teachers. They tried corrupting that system, and the union took them to court and won. And so the rules of engagement for promotion in the teaching service, those are being adhered to right now. But the police, it's totally different. Why can't the police force somebody from the representing the policemen take the commission to court if they are not in line with the mandate for promotions? It can work. Even
If I may
Any other-
interject,
Yes.
it's not just we speaking roughly about the depoliticization of the government. A government is ceases to be a political institution once it wins power and becomes a national institution representing the citizen, which includes people who voted against the government. So this is why the emphasis is on a national government that represents all of its citizens. And you have a body of diverse interests that must be met by the government. So we're speaking of a government that represents everyone, and that would take care of even the police as an institution. And this came to the fore recently with the conference by the president, where he unleashed his fury on civil servants. That fury should be unleashed on all the ministers of the government by the ministers and not by the president acting as a dictator. And the matters should be discussed in Parliament before it even reaches those stages.
Thank you, Brother Rohit, for your conclusion. Any other
We have an
question from
Anassa Williams is from which media? Is that a media person?
Oh, I'm sorry. That went by mistake.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yes, she has her hand up.
The hand was up.
Yeah.
Said it was by mistake. Any other questions?
You said something.
No, I'm asking if there are any other questions or clarifications from the media. Request for clarification from the media. If not, Dr. Hines, would you want to have some closing statements?
No, I think we have said enough. I think we
Okay.
can close it there.
Could I ask you, Professor Hines,
All right.
to elaborate on how exactly, in the absence of biometrics, could you give us a little more detail? Do you see how, in the absence of biometrics, as you're demanding, can the opposition strengthen its presence at the polling stations as vigilance? What exactly, can you give us some more detail about what needs to be done?
Well, no, we have not exercised our mind to that extent. We are saying at this point, we are assuming that there will be biometrics. We are assuming that there would be a clean voters list. We are assuming that there would be impartial GCOM. When we get to the point of, if we get to that point, that there will be no biometrics and there no clean voters list, then we'll make those decisions and we'll be able to answer the question that you are posing much more clearly. But for now, we are gung-ho on biometric, a clean voters list, and an impartial GCOM, and we are not going to be diverted from that. And we're assuming that on election day, that that along with a more vigilant core of polling agents, we will get a better election than we had in 2020.
So, is that it from the media? Dennis, you're through with all your questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Abram.
Ms. Marshall? Is she still there?
No, I think she's going to Miss Williams. I didn't get which media Miss Williams is from, but I think Miss Williams is
NASA?
No, nothing else.
I'm good. Thank you.
Which media
just
you
want to know which
representing?
media house you're from.
Pardon?
Which media house are you representing?
Just want to know which.
Oh, I'm from Kitra News.
Oh, okay. That's all. We didn't just.
It's fine. Kitra News.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, to you.
And I think Mr. DeCosta. Mark, you have any questions
Mark,
for us?
Good morning, Dr. Hines. Good day, Dr. Hines. I just now was able to join the meeting. I to join the press conference. I wasn't.
All right, we'll make the press release available to you.
I have a question.
Okay.
Even though I haven't, I have not, I hadn't seen the anything prior to this. In your last press conference, you, in response to a question, I believe from Svetlana, you said that the WPA's position is, or the priority of the WPA is a clean voters list. When my colleague Svetlana asked about timeline, you mentioned that you don't believe that such an exercise would go beyond something like a year. You mentioned months, and I think a year was the outer limit, if I got that correctly. But my question is this, and please forgive me if I'm going off on a thing. Remember, I didn't see anything prior to this when I had this question in my mind. My question is, my observation is, first, since the press conference in which you mentioned that the position of the WPA is in favor of going over a little bit, I note that in last Thursday's PVP press conference with the Vice President, he said that he called it a quote unquote trap. That he would not be interested in any such thing. That's an aside. My question is to the WPA executive. My question is this: since that last press conference, has the WPA approached, or has the WPA consulted with other members of GOPP or other members of the APNU, and concerning that particular issue? Because I have not seen anything out of the PNC or out of any other member of the of the GOPP regarding the WPA's position that it's willing to go over a little bit in order to ensure the integrity of the voters list. Gentlemen, could you take that, please? Question.
No, we have not approached or raised it with our colleagues in the joint opposition party. It's purely a WPA's position, and we noted the Vice President's response that we are setting a trap for him, a trap for the PPP. And we want to say the only trap we are setting is free and fair elections. And that trap we are setting for all of us, because all of us should be committed to free and fair elections. We too don't want to see the PPP stay in office for an extra day. So we are at one with the Vice President on that. But if we had a choice between the PPP stealing 5 years and it staying in office for 5 days or 5 months to ensure that it doesn't steal 5 years, we will go for the 5 days or 5 months so that we can get it right. Our objective is to have a free and fair elections, to prevent the PPP or any party from stealing the next elections. So if the PPP has intentions of stealing 5 years, we are saying that if it comes to it remaining in office for a few more weeks or a few more months, we will go for that to prevent it from stealing 5 years. That is our answer to the vice president. He accuses us that when we want, when he agrees, if he agrees to going over the time, he will then call for a national government and government of national unity and so forth. And he's referring to in 1990, when the PPP agreed with us and the rest of the opposition that for the reforms of that time to take effect, they will have to extend the term of the government. And the term of the government was extended for almost 2 years. And we had proposed to the PPP that we asked the PNC at that time to, for that period of 2 years, for there to be a national government, a power sharing government. We went to the PNC and the PNC agreed. The PNC agreed that it would make sense that if you were going over the stipulated time, it alone should not remain in office, and it was open to a government that included the PPP, the WPA, the PNC, and so forth. The PPP objected to a national government at that time. So Mr. Jagdio's references to that. All we can say is that Mr. Jagdio and the PPP are afraid of a national government. They're afraid of power sharing because they are dictators. Only dictators, only authoritarians are up and opposed to national governments and to sharing power with other parties and stakeholders in a country. They're wedded to one party dictatorship. And so they that informs the vice president's position.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. A follow-up, tangential follow-up. I note that you said in a previous engagement that you are not of the view that there's any. You're of the view that things should be made public. You don't subscribe to the idea of not airing your laundry in public, and I think there was to paraphrase you. I wonder. I'm wondering something now, given the answer that you just said, that you have not reached out to the other parties within GOPP or within APNU, of which WPA is a part. And in the last press conference, that particular point that was made regarding the WPA's position, it's willing to go a bit over to give them some time to get the list right. One would believe that such a position would almost reach the level of what would be a bombshell position. It would be it's a significant development, it's a significant policy statement by the WPA. And considering the magnitude of such a position, one wonders at this point why didn't the WPA communicate that policy position to the others within GOPP and APNU? Is there an issue regarding communications? I'm asking a question within the context of you having said that there's nothing wrong with public discourse on internal party matters.
Let me
one more.
Go ahead, Ogun.
Okay, I don't know if he's finished because he seems to be wanting to make some other point. But if he's finished, I will want to respond by simply saying that all the opposition parties have a right to make profound public policies without pre-agreement with the WPA. There is no agreement within the joint opposition that tied any party, to having to consult with the others before they make any statement on anything, whether it's profound or not profound. So that shouldn't be lifted to a point to suggest that there is any differences in the coalition. It is just the reality of politics. Not until you reach as a collective to a certain point of agreement on how you proceed, those things kick in. But as the opposition party stands, okay, those things, that thing or that particular requirement is not a necessity. And we shouldn't try to treat it as if it represents some major difference or lack of confidence or trust among opposition parties. It's natural politics. Until there is agreement that ties you to certain behaviors, people will exercise the independent right to make statements and to advocate the party's policies.
And just to add to Brother Ogun, we are not a member of the APNU. We are not part of the APNU. We left the APNU 4 years ago. We are part of the joint opposition, and the joint opposition party has a limited agenda right now. And that agenda is biometrics, a clean voters list, and impartial GCOM machinery. So as the joint opposition, that is our agenda. We don't have a larger agenda. And so therefore, even if the WPA wanted to raise that matter with our partners, the joint opposition parties framework doesn't allow for that. We operate on a limited agenda right now. Perhaps as things move forward, that agenda may widen and matters such as these could be discussed. But nothing is stopping the media from asking the AFC and the PNC what's their position on the WPA's proposal, because reporters have asked us our position on proposals put forward by the other parties. So perhaps at the next press conference of the two parties, they can be asked those questions, I would suggest.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. I like how you hit the ball right back at me. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your answer.
Yes.
Brother Chair, I would think the fundamental question facing the Guyanese population is whether the elections should be decided as to what goes into the boxes before the elections or what comes out of the boxes after the elections. So what do we call elections if we cannot guarantee the safety of the votes that goes into the boxes before the elections?
That question is rhetorical, I guess. So we don't need to answer that. But yeah, it's a good point, and I appreciate that you have put that forward because it's a basis for everything that we're talking about. All right. Any other question from the media? Any other statement from any member of the executive?
No, I think.
All right.
For no one else, yeah.
Okay, if there is none, then I would like to thank the media and all of the members of the executive for being part of today's press conference. And Professor, you're saying something?
Oh, no.
Okay. And we look forward to seeing you next week, same time when we have another press conference of the Working People's Alliance. Do have a wonderful day. Thank you and goodbye.
Good night.